I wouldn't sit down there alongside either one of you. If I was on my last leg, I don't see how being alone is gonna help you none. You couldn't get no worse company. A tense silence gripped the set. Cameras were ready, scripts in hand. But one of Gunsmoke's biggest stars refused to come out of their trailer. Another never showed up at all. No warnings, no goodbyes. Just empty spaces where legends once stood. Fans were told it was retirement or creative differences, but what if that was a lie? Oh, now you're gonna start to practice medicine, all right. Right. There's a proof how wrong you are when you're wrong. What if the real reasons these actors left were far more scandalous and carefully buried? Some secrets disappeared with the show itself. But now, for the first time, we're opening every door Hollywood tried desperately to keep closed. And what's behind them might just ruin your favorite Western forever. But before we spill the secrets behind those shocking exits, you need to understand just how massive Gunsmoke really was. This wasn't just another cowboy show. It was a cultural beast, a TV empire with a spotless image. Well, at least on the surface. Because the bigger the spotlight, the darker the shadows hiding behind it. Gunsmoke's cultural impact. Gunsmoke wasn't just a hit. It was a TV juggernaut, a full-blown phenomenon that gripped American living rooms for 2 entire decades, 20 years. That's 635 episodes of frontier justice, smoky saloons, dusty trails, and dramatic standoffs. If you were alive from the mid-50s to the mid-70s, Gunsmoke was practically background noise in your home. It aired from 1955 to reviving everything from black and white television to color, the rise of rock and roll, the fall of the Beatles, and even the moon landing. At its peak, it wasn't just popular. It was a show to watch week after week. Millions of viewers would tune in, settling in front of their televisions like it was a family ritual. And in many homes, it was parents, kids, and even grandparents all gathered together to watch Marshall Matt Dillon clean up the town of Dodge City with nothing but a strong jawline, a steady gun hand, and a sense of right and wrong that felt carved out of stone. The show built its brand around the idea of good morals. Gunsmoke was seen as squeaky clean, noble, and deeply American. The kind of show you could watch with your grandmother without worrying about anything too racy or scandalous popping up on screen. It gave people comfort, stability, and predictability. A sheriff who always did the right thing. A town where justice eventually prevailed. A barmaid who never lost her class. But you want to know a little secret? That perfectly polished image was just a polished image. What we saw on screen was a picture of order and honor. But off screen, the vibe wasn't always so wholesome. You know how sometimes the couples who look the happiest on Instagram are the ones barely speaking in real life? Yeah, that kind of thing. The cast of Gunsmoke had chemistry on camera. But behind the scenes, let's just say, the saloon wasn't always full of friendly faces. There were personality clashes, creative differences, jealousy, exhaustion, and yes, some pretty wild rumors that we'll get into very soon. But that's what makes the contrast so wild. Gunsmoke was presented as the gold standard of American television. It was the apple pie of prime time, the show that made cowboys cool and lawmen legends. If your kids said they wanted to be Matt Dillon when they grew up, you gave them a proud pat on the back. The actors were admired, almost saint-like to their fans. It was nearly impossible to imagine that any of them would want to leave. So, when actors started quietly disappearing from the show, audiences were confused. There were no dramatic send-offs or big finales for some of these stars. One week they were in Dodge City, next they were gone, and the official reasons: always squeaky clean, he wanted to try new roles. She needed a break from filming. It was just time to move on. Sounded simple enough. But when a show is pulling in ratings, like Gunsmoke was, you don't just walk away for a change of pace. No, there's almost always more to the story. And more often than not, the real reasons are the kind you don't put in a press release. Now remember, this was a time before social media, before tabloids went digital, and before celebrity gossip could go viral in seconds. So the Messier stuff, it got buried quietly, sometimes permanently. Unless you knew where to look or who to ask, you were stuck with the sanitized version. But we're not doing that here. We're digging through the secrets, lifting the veil and shining a light on the parts of Gunsmoke that were never supposed to make it into the spotlight. And believe me, some of these stories will change the way you see this show and the people in it. Because as perfect as Dodge City looked on the screen, real life behind the scenes was anything but a fairy tale. And once we get into what really went down with some of these actors, you'll understand why they couldn't wait to ride off into the sunset and never come back. So now that we pulled back the curtain on Gunsmoke's shiny reputation, it's time to crack into the first real mystery, the first sudden exit, the first shocking departure that no one saw coming. Ready? Let's talk about the fan favorite, who left a massive hole in the show and left fans begging for answers. 5. Dennis Weaver. Chester Good. Now, let's spill a little tea on one of the most unforgettable faces of Gunsmoke, the man behind the loyal, slightly awkward, always lovable Chester Good. Yes, we're talking about Dennis Weaver. For 9 whole seasons, Chester hobbled through Dodge City at Marshall Matt Dillon's side, always ready with a concerned expression, a loyal word, or a well-timed Mr. Dillon. He wasn't just comic relief. Chester was the heart of the show for many fans. But what the audience didn't know was that, behind that iconic limp and southern drawl, Dennis Weaver was quietly yearning for a lot more. Let's start with that limp, shall we? That limp wasn't in the script. Weaver came up with it during his audition to make Chester stand out. And to be fair, it did work. But as Gunsmoke took off and seasons passed, the very thing that got him the role started to weigh on him literally. Imagine limping on purpose for hours a day, week after week, year after year. It wasn't just tiring, it was exhausting. And physically, it began to take a toll on his body. He confessed in interviews that the limp, though effective for the role, became a real drag. There's even a quote from Weaver that perfectly sums it up. After almost 10 years, I want to walk without a limp. You could practically hear the sigh in his voice when he said it, but it wasn't just the physical strain that pushed him to the edge. Dennis Weaver was an artist at heart, and artists, they hate being boxed in. Despite all the love fans had for Chester, Weaver felt trapped by the role. Week after week, he played the same faithful sidekick, rarely getting to stretch his acting chops beyond a specific brand of loyal awkwardness. He didn't want to be remembered only as Chester Good. He wanted to grow, to try different roles, and to prove he was more than just a cowboy shadow. Now, making the decision to leave wasn't easy. Gunsmoke was a hit, and he was beloved. And let's be honest, TV gigs that secure your spot in American living rooms every week are hard to walk away from. But Weaver knew that if he didn't take the leap, he'd be typecast forever. And so in 1964, after 290 episodes, Dennis Weaver hung up Chester's boots and walked away, finally without a limp. And how did the cast react? Well, let's just say it was a bittersweet goodbye. James Arnold, who played Marshall Dillon, was reportedly deeply affected by the departure. The two had a strong bond both on screen and off. Losing Chester meant losing that banter, that rhythm, and that trusted presence by his side. The whole crew felt it. Chester wasn't just a character. He was family, and like any family, when one member walks away, it leaves a noticeable hole. But if Dennis Weaver was scared of falling flat after his big leap, he didn't show it. And more importantly, he didn't have to be. He went on to star in the hit series McCloud, trading his limping deputy persona for a confident fish out of water lawman in the big city. The show was a success, and suddenly Weaver wasn't just Chester anymore. He was Dennis Weaver, a versatile actor with real range. In later interviews, Weaver looked back on Gunsmoke with nothing but fondness. He appreciated what the show had given him, and never badmouthed the role. That made him a household name. But he stood by his decision to leave. saying it allowed him to grow, both personally and professionally. And honestly, that kind of self-awareness and courage deserves its own round of applause. So next time you catch a rerun of Gunsmoke and see Chester limping onto the screen, just remember, behind that hobble was a man dreaming of more. And he got it. Sadly, Dennis Weaver passed away on February 24, 2006, at the age of 81, due to complications from prostate cancer, at his home in Ridgeway, Colorado. Just when you thought the drama had limped out the door, with Chester, another storm was brewing behind the swinging saloon doors of Gunsmoke. And this time, it had everything to do with the show's fiery redhead, a secret ultimatum, and whispers that she saw the writing on the wall before anyone else dared to read it. Ready for the tea on Miss Kitty? Buckle up. For Amanda Blake, Miss Kitty. Amanda Blake, or as millions of Americans knew her, Miss Kitty from Gunsmoke, was one of the sassiest, most unforgettable redheads to ever grace our television screens. She was more than just a pretty face. Behind the Long Branch saloon counter, she was grit, glamour, and a whole lot of gumption, rolled into one iconic TV character. But while the camera made it seem like she was living her best life, in Dodge City behind the scenes was a different story. A story of tension, clashing egos, and a quiet but calculated exit that had Hollywood politics written all over it. For nearly 2 decades, Amanda Blake lit up Saturday night TV. From 1955 to 1965, she wore that frilly red dress, flipped her fiery curls, and gave Marshall Matt Dillon, played by James Arness, someone to share the silent glances and unspoken love with. Fans were obsessed with the slow burn chemistry between Miss Kitty and Dillon. She was the kind of woman who could shoot a gun, serve whiskey, and put a man in his place, all before supper. But just when it seemed like she'd be part of Gunsmoke forever, she vanished without a trace. No big farewell, no in-character send-off, nothing. And that's where things started to get a little suspicious. The official reason Amanda gave for leaving Gunsmoke was the commute. She claimed that traveling back and forth between her home and the studio had become exhausting. Well, to be fair, that was understandable. 17 years is a long time. But something about that excuse never sat right with die-hard fans. People whispered, speculated, and side-eyed the whole situation. Turns out they had every reason to. Behind the polished smiles and red lipstick was a storm brewing between Amanda Blake and the show's producer, John Mantley, and it wasn't just a little drizzle. It was a full-on thunderstorm. Sources close to the production said Amanda and Mantley clashed often. She had strong opinions, and she wasn't afraid to voice them, especially when it came to her character. She felt Miss Kitty was being sidelined in storylines, pushed to the background, and turned into a glorified extra. And if there was one thing Amanda Blake wasn't about to do, it was play second fiddle. After nearly 2 decades of holding her own, Mantley, on the other hand, reportedly grew tired of Amanda's pushback. Their relationship soured, and while no one was throwing chairs, the tension was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. The writing was on the wall. Both knew that the energy on set was shifting, and not in a good way. Rather than let things spiral into a public mess that could damage everyone's reputation, Amanda and the producers decided on a silent truce. She'd say she was leaving on her own terms. They'd play along and everyone would say face. It was the classic Hollywood dance. Quit before you're fired, smile for the cameras, and let the PR team spin the story. And let's be honest, Amanda Blake was smart. She understood the business. Staying would have meant swallowing her pride and watching Miss Kitty fade into the background. Leaving, however, kept her legacy intact. Interestingly enough, she did make a brief return in 1987 for the TV movie Gunsmoke: Return to Dodge. It was like a nostalgic trip down memory lane. Fans were thrilled to see her back in Kitty's boots, even if just for a little while. But the vibe wasn't quite the same. And Amanda herself didn't stick around for the other follow-up films. She had already said her goodbye, even if it was wrapped in silence and hidden behind a smile. Despite the drama, Amanda Blake's legacy is sealed in television history. But when it comes to her exit from Gunsmoke, the truth is clear: it wasn't about the drive. It was about the drama. Amanda Blake didn't just walk away. She made the smart move, the strategic exit. The quiet mic drop in classic Kitty style. She left before anyone could show her the door. And in Hollywood, that's how legends are made. Now, while Amanda Blake was making her quiet escape, in a cloud of mystery and red curls, there was another Gunsmoke star, whose behind-the-scenes story deserves a spot in the Gossip Hall of Fame. Let's just say, when it came to drama, it wasn't all saloon doors and shootouts. Because what really went down with Milburn Stone might just make your jaw drop. 3. Milburn Stone. Doc Adams. If there was one man in Gunsmoke who looked like he'd seen it all, patched it all, and lived to tell the tale, it was Milburn Stone, better known as Doc Adams. With that gruff voice, scruffy beard, and don't mess with me attitude, he was Dodge City's resident curmudgeon, with a heart of gold. But behind that well-worn medical bag and crusty charm was a real-life story that'll have you shaking your head and saying, "No way he went through all that and came back." But he did. Let's rewind to 1971. By that point, Milburn had been with Gunsmoke for over 15 years. Fans adored him, cast members respected him, and the producers, well, they counted on him probably a little too much. The show had become a machine, and Milburn was a key cog in the wheel. But like any machine, parts wear out. And that year, Milburn's body sent a message loud and clear. A massive heart attack nearly ended him. And not the kind of mild chest pains Hollywood likes to sugarcoat in press releases. No, this one was serious. He had to step away from the show for a long stretch to recover. During his absence, the producers introduced a new character, Dr. John Chapman, to fill the void. Milburn was literally fighting for his life, while tabloids wondered if Doc Adams had finally closed up shop for good. Now here's where it gets juicy. Most actors in Milburn's position would have taken the health scare as a cue to bow out, gracefully, a dignified exit, enjoy the rest of his life on a porch swing, sipping iced tea. But no, that's not how this tale went down. Rumor has it, as soon as Milburn was stable, the producers came crawling. Maybe not with flowers, but definitely with desperation. Gunsmoke without Doc. The fans wouldn't hear of it. Letters poured in, viewers were furious. And behind the scenes, CBS felt the pressure. They needed Milburn back, and they knew it. So they begged. At first Milburn hesitated. He wasn't some wide-eyed kid chasing fame. He was tired. The work hours were brutal. Scripts weren't giving him much wiggle room. So why did he return? You see, Milburn Stone had a deep, unshakable bond with the show. He'd been there since the early days, when nobody knew if a radio western could even make it on TV. He'd watched it grow, evolve, survive network cuts, and dodge cancellation bullets. Walking away felt like abandoning family. And truth be told, he still had some fight left in him. Maybe not the kind for bar brawls, but enough to put that white coat back on and keep the legacy alive. However, Milburn's tenure on Gunsmoke was not without its challenges. He often felt overworked and desired creative freedom in his role. In one notable incident, Stone had a disagreement with a young producer over a scene he felt didn't align with the show's essence. Frustrated, he walked off the set declaring, "I am too old to scare and too rich to care." His co-stars, including James Arness, supported him. Milburn Stone didn't just play Doc Adams. He was Doc Adams, gritty, loyal, and a little too stubborn for his own good. His return wasn't about money or ego. It was about unfinished business. And even though his heart nearly gave out, his heart was also what brought him back. That's the kind of comeback Hollywood doesn't script. It just happens, and it happened with Milburn Stone, the man who wouldn't let Gunsmoke go without a fight. Next up is Ken Curtis, the unforgettable Festus Hagen, whose off-screen story is just as wild as the way he walked. Trust me, you think you know Festus. But do you really? To Ken Curtis Hagen. You know him. The man who brought Festus Hagen to life on Gunsmoke was more than just the scruffy, mule-riding deputy with a twangy draw. Festus wasn't just comic relief on Gunsmoke. He was the glue that held Dodge City together when things got a little too serious. Ken Curtis joined Gunsmoke in the early 1960s to replace Dennis Weaver's beloved Chester Good after he left to pursue other acting opportunities. And let's be real, it was a game changer. He brought a whole new flavor to the show. While Matt Dillon handled the law and Doc Adams managed the blood and bandages, Festus brought hard humor and just enough unpredictability to keep audiences glued to their screens. He wasn't just a sidekick. He became a staple. Ken gave Festus life in a way no other actor could. The way he talked, the way he shuffled, the way he argued with DOC over nonsense. It all felt so real. But when the main run of Gunsmoke ended, and the reunion movie started rolling out years later, fans were confused. Where was Festus? Why wasn't Ken Curtis part of the return to Dodge family reunion? The answer isn't as simple as scheduling or retirement. Turns out Ken Curtis had demanded a higher salary than Amanda Blake for his participation in the 1987 reunion film Gunsmoke. Return to Dodge producer John Mantley recounted that Ken requested twice the amount Blake was receiving. When Mantley declined, Curtis reportedly stated then, "I'm not coming," and that was the end of the discussion. This salary dispute was not the sole reason Ken declined to return. He also had significant concerns about changes to the script. Ken was reportedly unhappy with revisions that deviated from the original story, which he had initially supported. His dissatisfaction with both the financial and creative aspects led him to sever ties with the production, telling Mantley never to call him again. Ken Curtis may have walked away from the revival, but he never walked away from Gunsmoke. His decision to prioritize his principles over financial gain and creative differences underscores his commitment to maintaining the integrity of the Gunsmoke legacy. While some stars were battling producers behind closed doors or limping away from fame, there was another familiar face holding down the fort at the Long Branch Saloon. You might not have heard much about him off-screen, but what happened with Glenn Strange is the kind of quiet heartbreak that'll stick with you long after his last call. One Glenn Strange, Sam Noonan. Now if you ever bellied up to the bar at the Long Branch Saloon, even from the comfort of your couch, chances are you were greeted by a tall, steady figure with a calm voice and kind eyes. That was Glenn Strange, who played Sam Noonan, the bartender who saw it all, heard it all, and somehow managed to keep it all together. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't fiery, but Sam was the kind of guy you'd trust with your secrets, your drink order, and maybe even your last dime. And the man behind the bar, oh, he was just as solid. Glenn Strange wasn't new to the screen when he joined Gunsmoke. In fact, he'd been around the block plenty of times, often playing villains in old westerns, or even Frankenstein's monster in the Universal horror films. But when he stepped into Dodge City, he found a different kind of role, one that let him be the gentle giant instead of the growling brute, and fans loved him for it. Sam wasn't a loud character. He didn't carry a gun or get tangled in love triangles, but he was there week after week, pouring whiskey, wiping the bar, and tossing out the occasional one-liner that landed just right. He was part of the heartbeat of Gunsmoke, the guy who made Dodge City feel like a place you could actually visit. And in a show full of lawmen, outlaws, and dramatic tension, Sam Noonan gave us something rare, calm in the chaos. But then just like that, he was gone. It wasn't some dramatic on-screen farewell. There were no big exit scenes or emotional goodbyes. Glenn Strange quietly stepped away from the show in the late 1970s, and most viewers didn't know the real reason. Until much later, the truth was simple and sad. He had fallen ill, and it wasn't the kind of illness a few weeks of rest could fix. Glenn had developed lung cancer, and his health began to fade. faster than anyone expected. Even while struggling behind the scenes, Glenn kept showing up to work for as long as he could, and never made his illness the center of attention. Just like Sam, he handled it all with quiet dignity. And when he finally couldn't keep going, he left the same way he came in, humbly, gracefully, without making a fuss. His passing in 1973 left a hole in the heart of Gunsmoke, with 5 of his episodes airing posthumously. His final appearance was in the episode The Hanging of Newly O'Brien, which aired on November 26, 1973. His absence was felt deeply by fans and cast members alike. Buck Taylor, who played Newly O'Brien, honored Strange's memory by naming his 3rd son after him. In a world of big personalities and big exits, Glenn Strange gave us a different kind of goodbye. One that didn't need a spotlight or a send-off, just a simple fade to black, leaving behind memories of a bartender who knew how to listen, when to speak, and how to make a Western feel a little more like home. But wait, let's shift the focus a bit. We can't talk about the show without James Arness, the one who rode every dusty mile from start to finish, the only one who stayed through every single season, carrying the weight of Gunsmoke like a true Western titan. The lead man's burden, James Arness. Marshall Matt, if Gunsmoke had a beating heart, it was James Arness, no question about it. Towering at 6'7", with a voice that could stop a bar fight cold, Ernest was Marshall Matt Dillon. He carried the badge, the boots, and the burden of Dodge City for 20 long seasons, a record at the time, and on the outside, he looked like he could have gone 20 more. But behind that cool, stoic exterior, James Arness was tired, and he wanted out way earlier than anybody knew. Here's the thing, by the late 60s, the cracks were already starting to show. Arness was worn down, quiet, reserved, and never one to stir up gossip himself. He kept most of his feelings out of the press. He'd been carrying the show on his back for over a decade, and the weight was getting unbearable. However, when asked to the constant filming schedule, the endless publicity appearances, and the pressure to deliver every single week felt for him, Arness said he was pressed about it. I spend a lot of time here, but the shows are planned so that only 1 out of every 4 or 5 are heavy with my scenes. The rest of the time I'm in and out, and the others in the cast carry on. So I get a couple of days off here and there. Then we get 8 to 10 weeks off in the winter, and 8 to 10 weeks off in the summer. He stated James Arness never walked away, not because he loved the spotlight. Honestly, Arness hated fame. He wasn't the kind of guy who craved attention. In fact, he once offered a publicity agent a $20,000 salary per year to avoid generating publicity for him. But then why did he stay? I guess we could say loyalty. Arnett felt responsible for the show, for the crew, and most importantly for the cast. He knew that if he walked away, the whole thing would fall apart. Gunsmoke was Matt Dillon, and without Matt Dillon, there was no Gunsmoke. And when it finally ended in 1975, he didn't cry, he didn't even give a big speech. He just tipped his hat, walked off set, and finally let the badge go. He never left the screen completely. But nothing ever meant as much to him, or cost him as much as Marshall Matt Dillon. James Arness didn't just play a Western hero. In many ways he was one, quiet, strong, and holding the line, even when no one else knew how close he came to letting it all go. So now that we've pulled back the dusty curtain on the Gunsmoke cast, here's the real question. Was the show's success built on loyalty or silence? And if you knew what the cast really went through, would you still call it America's most wholesome Western? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Tap on the next video on your screen.